In this section, we are going to learn about HTML forms. Now, an HTML form is used to collect user input. The user input is most often sent to a server for processing. This is an example of a form. The form element. The HTML form element is used to create an HTML form for user input. It is going to start with the form tag and end with the form tag. And between these tags, everything will be form elements. So the form element is a container for different types of input elements such as text field, checkbox, radio button, submit button, etc. The input element. The HTML input element is the most used form element. An input element can be displayed in many ways depending on the type attribute. If the type is text, it will display a single line text input field. If the type is radio, it will display a radio button for selecting one of many choices. If the type is checkbox, it will display a checkbox for selecting zero or more of many choices. If the type is submit, it will display a submit button for submitting the form. If the type is button, it will display a clickable button. Now let's have a look at them in our code. We have opened up our VS Code and taken form tag, and inside the form tag, we are going to write input, and the type is going to be text. Now, if we want to give what we will input in the input field, we can just give a placeholder. So placeholder, if I write type your name here, you can see we have a placeholder here that says type your name here. Now, let's look at the input type radio. Let me give appear so it is easier to differentiate. That is radio. We'll look at input type checkbox. Now we'll look at input type submit. And lastly, we'll look at input type button. Now, here you cannot differentiate which one is which. We need a label for that. So let's have a look at what are the labels. The label element tag, the label tag defines a label for many form elements. The label element is useful for a screen reader user because the screen reader will read out loud the label when the user focuses on the input element. The label element also helps users who have difficulty clicking on very small region, such as radio button or checkbox, because when the user clicks the text within the label element, it toggles the radio button or checkbox. The for attribute of the label tag should be equal to the ID attribute of the input element to bind them together. So this is very crucial to remember. The for attribute of the label tag will be similar to the ID attribute of the input element. Now let's have a look at them in action. Now we are going to give label to our input tag. So we are going to write label for, and before doing that, we will give an ID here. ID is going to say name input, and we are going to write here name input. And inside that label, we are going to write your first name. Now, when you look at this input element, you can easily understand what you should be putting here. Now for radio, we are going to write a label for, let's just say, give it an ID, gender, and we are going to write gender, select gender, or maybe say male or female, male, and then type another one. Let's just say is gender female, gender male, gender female. Now you can toggle between them. Now let's have a look at the checkbox. We are going to copy paste the PR label and give it an ID of uh, employee. Now the submit and everything is going to remain the same. Let's learn what does the submit button do. The input type submit defines a button for submitting the form data to a form handler. The form handler is typically a file on the server with a script for processing input data. The form handler is specified in the form's action attribute. Now, the name attribute for input. We will see that the input field must have a name attribute to be submitted. If the name attribute is omitted, the value of the input field will not be sent at all. The text area element. The text area element defines a multi-line input field, a text area. The row attribute specifies the visible number of lines in a text area, and the calls attribute specifies the visible width of a text area. Now let's have a look at it in the code. We are going to start another field and it is going to be text area. So text area. For text area, we are going to take text area tag and there will be attribute name. It is going to be called message and then row will be 10 and calls will be 30. Now if you write there is something in the text area, you can see here is written there is something in the text area. If you do not want to put anything here, you can also do that. Your user can put something like placeholder, put like write your feedback. The placeholder to show up, we have to make sure there is nothing in between the text area tags. So we are going to delete this line. And now you see our placeholder is showing up.